This is how one of the most famous presidents of the United States was taken out. I present John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who became president of the Americans in 1960, facing a quite complicated outlook, because the Cold War with the communists was on fire. Over the years, this guy had really annoyed many people, but the possible reasons for his assassination I'll explain at the end of the story, because there are many crazy theories. So, enough with the chatter, let's get to the assassination. It's 1963, the elections are just a few months away, and Kennedy heads to Texas for the usual campaign tour to drum up support in the region. So, on November 21st, he arrives in Fort Worth. He sleeps there, the next day he has breakfast with businessmen, and then he takes Air Force One again for a mere 13-minute flight to Dallas, which is right next door. When he arrives at the airport, he boards a very stylish open-top limousine, which is going to transport him to a convention center where he'll have lunch with other important figures from the area, the Dallas Trade Mart, located 16 kilometers from the airport. Keep in mind that the entire route had been published by the local press, so that anyone who wished could come out and see the president. And this car isn't normal because there are 6 people riding in it. In front are 2 Secret Service agents, the driver and a chief. In the second row are the Texas governor and his wife. And finally, in the back, are Kennedy with Jacqueline, who is the First Lady. All right, 10 minutes into their journey at 12:30, the motorcade arrives at Dealey Plaza. And at that very moment, bang, 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 3 gunshots rang out according to what 80% of the witnesses reported. The first shot didn't hit anyone, but just 3 seconds later, the second shot was fired, which entered Kennedy's back and then exited through his throat. A rather brutal wound, but one he probably would have survived. That same bullet also struck the governor in front, entering through his shoulder, exiting his chest, then it shattered his right wrist, and ultimately lodged itself in his thigh. Oh my god, seriously. This bullet would become popularly known as the magic bullet, because the incredibly brutal thing had caused 7 wounds in one go to 2 people, changing direction multiple times. But then further analysis determined that, well, it was possible. At that moment, Kennedy, overcome by pain, writhed in his seat. His wife asked him what was happening. And that's precisely where the final blow lands. The third shot, another 4 seconds after the second, impacts squarely in the back of the president's skull, causing a portion of his brains to fly into the air. The First Lady, reacting quickly and overcome by panic, attempts to call for help. A Secret Service agent jumps from his vehicle and climbs onto the limousine to protect the VIPs. The driver then floors the accelerator to reach Parkland Memorial Hospital as quickly as possible, a journey they complete in just 6 minutes, traveling at about 130 kilometers per hour through the city. Upon arrival at the emergency room, doctors see Kennedy agonizing. They tried to revive him, but just 20 minutes later his death was officially announced. Immediately after, the coroner arrived to perform the autopsy, but the Secret Service prevented him and took the body by force. They put him on Air Force One and left for Bethesda, a military hospital in Maryland, because at that location, trusted personnel would perform the autopsy. The thing is, it turned out to be quite a disaster, because during the process, fragments of the bullet went missing. They barely took any notes, no photographs, and this, well, created a huge cloud of mystery and a lot of conspiracy theories. And now, this is where the million-dollar question comes in. Who on earth just took out the President of the United States, and from where? Ho, ho, ho. Let me introduce you to Lee Harvey Oswald, born in New Orleans in 1939. While still in school, his psychiatrist had already noted that he displayed schizoid patterns and passive-aggressive tendencies. He was a disturbed individual. In fact, his mother completely neglected him, and they ended up taking his custody, placing him in a children's home. Later, at 17, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. There, during the shooting tests, his marksmanship was graded. There are 3 classifications: marksman, sharpshooter, and expert. Well, Oswald got the most basic one, the marksman rating. In those few years in the Army, he faced no less than 3 courts-martial. One for accidentally shooting himself in the elbow with a pistol, another for confronting a sergeant, and the last for firing his rifle into the jungle during a night watch in the Philippines, not knowing what the hell was on the other side. Of course, this hat trick led to him being demoted in rank, but he remained in the Army. At 20, Oswald had learned a little Russian and traveled to Moscow for a week of tourism. There he tells a group of officials that he wants to obtain Soviet citizenship, but they deny it to him. And Oswald, the night before his visa expires, tries to commit suicide in the hotel bathtub. So he's admitted to a hospital, to the psychiatry ward, for another week there in Moscow. After his discharge, he goes to the US Embassy and asks to renounce his American citizenship. And of course, the KGB, seeing this young man wasn't quite right, just in case, allowed him to reside in the country for humanitarian reasons. But he wasn't staying in Moscow. and they sent him to Minsk, Belarus, where he was given an apartment, a factory job, and 24-hour surveillance by the Communist Secret Service. He'll be there for 3 years, where he marries a local woman and they have a daughter, but he gets tired of that life because he says there was hardly any leisure, and he asks the American embassy for a pass to return to the country. And even though they considered him a deserter for all the trouble he'd caused before, they let him bring his family in 1961. So, come on. Goodbye, Soviet Union. Hello again, United States. Oswald then settles in Dallas. There he purchases a pistol and a rifle through the mail, with which he attempts to assassinate a retired general who was an ultra-conservative and fiercely anti-communist while he was sitting at his desk at home. But the bullet hit the window frame and only wounded the turkey, but the case remained unsolved and they didn't catch Oswald. Several months later, he goes to Mexico City where he requests a visa to return to the Soviet Union. Oh my God, this guy is such a pain. And on the way, to visit Cuba. But KGB agents refuse him, deeming him a toxic person. Pause. There are experts who believe that Oswald was actually trying to get the necessary documents to escape after Kennedy's assassination, which he was already planning. Pause. With such a refusal, he returns to Dallas and starts working in a school book warehouse. The FBI, not foolish, already knew he'd been visiting the Soviet embassy in Mexico and decided to investigate him. So they go to his house when he's not there to see what he has around. They also interview his wife to see what she's about. And of course, when Oswald finds out they're investigating him behind his back, boom! He gets absolutely furious. He goes himself to the FBI's offices and leaves a note at the reception desk that says, "Let this serve as a serious warning. I will blow up the FBI and the police department if they do not stop harassing my wife." Oh my goodness, you're doing that now. What a face. But oh well, nothing happened. And 1 month after he started working at this warehouse, we arrived at the crucial day. Friday, November 22nd, 1963, Oswald went up to the 6th floor of his workplace building. Realized that President Kennedy's motorcade was going to pass right in front of him, so he took out his rifle and from the window fired the 3 shots that ended the life of the United States top leader. My goodness, Lechero, how do we know all this? Well, because several witnesses, drawn by the sound of the shots, looked up and believed they saw a man with a rifle shooting from the windows. 90 seconds after the shooting, a police officer quickly entered the building, gun in hand, went up to the 6th floor. In the 2nd, in the dining room, he found Oswald, who was calmly drinking a Coca-Cola. And the warehouse manager tells him, No, here, relax, this one works with us, he's one of ours. So the officer keeps climbing the stairs, until on the 6th floor, next to the window, he finds 3 bullet casings on the floor, and a few meters away, the rifle with a telescopic sight. Oh, it looks like our protagonist is about to get caught, right? But he had other plans. 6 minutes after police found the weapon on the 6th floor of the book warehouse where Oswald worked, he quietly left the building. He got on a city bus. A couple of stops later, he got off. There, he hailed a taxi, and it took him home. Inside, he changed his clothes, grabbed his revolver, and went out again. Out on the street, a police officer in his patrol car hears the shooter's description on the radio, and then, suddenly, on the sidewalk, he spots Oswald walking by. So he doesn't hesitate for a moment. He pulls up next to him, rolls down the passenger window, and asks him where he's going. "Hey, where are you going, young man?" The killer's answer makes the officer notice he's acting quite nervous. So the cop gets out of the vehicle, but at that very moment, Oswald pulls out his pistol and fires 4 shots. Bang, 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 killing him right there on the spot. Our protagonist runs away from there, and once he's far enough, he sneaks into a movie theater. The thing is, the ticket seller sees he hasn't paid and hasn't even looked at the movie posters that are showing. So he calls the police to report such a character. 15 minutes later, the police arrive. The officers enter the room, turn on the lights, and the ticket booth attendant points to Oswald, who was in the back rows. Oswald, with no way out, makes a gesture as if to surrender. But when the officer approaches, Oswald pulls out his revolver and shoots. The problem is the hammer doesn't strike correctly, and the bullet doesn't come out. There's a struggle, and finally they arrest Oswald. So they take him in, and at the police station he won't stop yelling that they arrested him just for having lived in the Soviet Union, and that he was a scapegoat. Keep in mind that initially he was only being accused of having killed that police officer who had stopped him. But as the hours passed, he started to gain ground to also take credit for Kennedy's assassination. They interrogated him for 2 days, but they got little out of him. So on Sunday, a pair of detectives apprehended Oswald at the police station and then escorted him to the armored van that was meant to transport him to the city jail. But just before he could step inside, something unexpected occurred. Jack Ruby, who owned a local nightclub, managed to slip through the assembled crowd, pulled out a revolver, and right in front of all the gathered press, shot Oswald at point-blank range directly in the stomach. Immediately afterwards, they arrest this new shooter, and quickly they take our protagonist back into the police station because he was slowly dying. There on the ground, bleeding profusely, the officers repeatedly question him. Come on, you have to tell us right now, did you take out Kennedy or not? You're about to die, so tell us, what else? And the other one, no. Minutes later, the ambulance arrives, which takes him, by a twist of fate, to the same hospital where Kennedy had died a couple of days earlier, and where his life would also end 2 hours after arriving at the emergency room. My God, what a messed up drama is this? And why the hell did that damn Jack Ruby just kill Oswald? Well, according to his confession, he did it to spare Kennedy's wife the humiliation of seeing him at the trial. But the truth is, this individual had connections to several mafia groups, and it's also rumored that he held meetings with FBI agents, and he might have been a key player in silencing Oswald, as he was part of a much larger conspiracy involving high-profile individuals. But this, I'm telling you, we will never know for sure. So Jack Ruby was sentenced to death, but he managed to get a retrial. However, he ended up dying before that, in 1967, from lung cancer. His last words before game over were, "There is nothing to hide." I acted alone, and he died. Alright, now that we know the entire official version of events, it's time to delve into the strange aspects of the case that have given rise to so many conspiracy theories. These are the truly bizarre things that occurred during Kennedy's assassination. We've already seen that investigators ruled Oswald acted alone and was the sole shooter. However, there are experts who don't see it that way. For example, 16 years later, a committee of the House of Representatives determined that, in reality, not 3 shots were fired, but 4. And that almost certainly there were 2 shooters involved, taking for granted that there was probably a conspiracy. But they ultimately found nothing conclusive. So, it's time to talk about the place known as the Grassy Knoll. Look, we're heading to the scene of the shooting. Here is Kennedy's car moving in that direction. Right here, around the corner, is the warehouse where Oswald supposedly fired. And right here next to it, there is a fence situated above a garden. Well, out of the 152 witnesses, approximately 51, that is 1/3, which is quite a significant number, reported hearing that, at the very least, the initial shot was fired from that location, from the hill. In fact, some individuals even claimed to have clearly seen the smoke or even smelled the gunpowder. Another fellow claimed to have seen 2 men with microphones behind the bush seconds before the assassination, but those testimonies were dismissed. Furthermore, several witnesses who were filming the scene and were focusing towards that direction where the hill was visible had to hand over their film to Secret Service agents, and those images never came to light. Oh, so the conspiracy theory claims Oswald didn't act alone, and there was a second shooter positioned there who fired at least the bullet that hit Kennedy in the head. In fact, if you watch the impact footage, you can see how Kennedy's inertial movement upon impact is backward and to the left. Therefore, that shot must have come from a slightly more advanced position on the right side of the road, right where the famous grassy knoll was. The official explanation for that strange head movement, however, is that it was caused by a neuromuscular spasm. And consider that the 3 shots were fired in just 5.6 seconds. So the FBI brought in professional snipers to, with the same type of rifle, conduct accurate shooting tests at that loading speed. And it was impossible. The few who managed to shoot that fast, 3 bullets in less than 6 seconds. Wow. They didn't even get close to the moving target, not a chance. Sure, they shot, but the shots just went to hell. And it was then determined that the minimum safe interval between shots was 2.3 seconds. And of course, Oswald, based on army tests, wasn't a great shot. So, either he'd signed up for AM classes, or he was carrying Cheetos. There was also trouble with the weapon, because witnesses and police officers said the rifle the agents found on the 6th floor of the warehouse was a bolt-action Mauser. But when the police took it away, after a few hours, authorities claimed the weapon used in the shootings was an Italian Mannlicher rifle. No Mauser, no way, it was a Mannlicher, you're out of your mind. As for the bullets, man, there's a huge controversy with the so-called magic bullet, it's insane. This was the second one fired, and it skewered Kennedy and the governor. That beast went through 15 layers of clothing, 7 layers of skin, 38 centimeters of muscle tissue, including 10 centimeters of the governor's rib and radius. Okay, I guess this can happen, but its trajectory was quite surprising, as some people say it had to make several almost 90-degree turns throughout the entire journey to enter and exit where it supposedly entered and exited. Although new 3D studies explain that if you place the protagonist in a certain position, it's feasible. Conspiracy theorists don't believe it, saying that in reality it happened like this. Oswald shoots, boom, hits Kennedy in the back, and that's it. Immediately after, from the grassy knoll, a second shooter fires and hits the governor. And then finally, the one from the knoll shoots again, hitting the president in the head. The most curious thing is that later the authorities found the bullet almost intact on the hospital stretcher where they had admitted the governor. It was there like Speaking of more unusual things, a CIA employee confessed that Oswald was actually a CIA agent, but after an internal investigation, it was ruled that this claim was not credible. Another thing, do you remember Oswald went to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City to try and get a visa for Cuba? Well, there are photos and voice recordings of that guy entering the embassy, and CIA agents, after analyzing the information, said that this person wasn't Oswald, but someone impersonating him. In fact, he spoke terrible Russian, which is quite strange considering Oswald had lived 3 years in Belarus and his wife was from there. And, surprisingly, in later analyses, the data from that period was mysteriously erased from the system. So the conspiracy theory suggests someone impersonated Oswald to check his Soviet contacts, implying they might be behind the assassination. Damn, this is so complicated. So then, who could have killed him and why? Pay attention, because I'm going to list the entire catalog of Kennedy's haters. They could have been government agents, motivated by some really juicy internal conspiracy. The Mafia, as revenge for the pressure the president was putting on them. Anti-Castroites, resentful of him for not invading Cuba after the Bay of Pigs disaster, which I mentioned in other videos. The CIA, because they saw him as lukewarm against communists, and that the weakling hadn't wanted to get involved in Vietnam. Had them fuming. Keep in mind that the year after Kennedy's death, the United States entered the Vietnam War. Coincidence? Aha, who knows? We also have, of course, Israel's Mossad, who are mad at Uncle Kennedy for not letting them start their nuclear weapons program, which I told you about in earlier episodes. And then there were also those close to him, like the vice president, who wanted to rise faster, Bush Sr. Well, there are 1,000 candidates here, but to this day, everything is still a mystery, so believe the official version, the parallel one, whichever one you prefer. When we die, we'll clear up the doubt and discuss it there in heaven. Later, guys!